There was a time in my life when walking was something I never thought about. You wake up, put your feet on the floor, and walk. You walk to the bathroom. You walk into the kitchen. You walk outside. You get into your car. You go to work. You climb stairs. You move through life without giving any of it a second thought. Walking is just something your body does. Until one day, it doesn't. And suddenly, something as simple as taking one step becomes one of the hardest things you've ever had to do. My name is Schrock. And after my stroke, I had to learn how to walk again. Not just physically, but mentally. Because when you've spent your entire life moving without thinking about it, losing that ability changes the way you see everything. Today, I want to take you through that journey. The fear, the frustration, the small victories, the setbacks, and the moment I realized that recovery isn't about taking giant leaps. Sometimes, it's about taking one step, then another, and another. Before my stroke, I was used to being active. I worked, I drove, I installed basketball goals, I went from one place to another. I had responsibilities, I had things to do. Life was busy. And I liked being busy. I never imagined that something could happen that would suddenly take away some of the most basic things I could do. But that's exactly what a stroke can do. One moment, you're living your normal life. And the next moment, your body doesn't respond the way you expect it to. For me, walking became completely different. My brain knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to stand. I wanted to move my leg. I wanted to take a step. But wanting to do something and actually being able to do it are two completely different things. That was one of the hardest lessons I had to learn. My body wasn't cooperating, and that was terrifying. Imagine knowing how to walk your entire life, and then suddenly needing help to do it. You look at something as simple as a hallway and think, how am I going to get from here to there? You look at a set of stairs and realize they're no longer just stairs. They're an obstacle. You look at a doorway and think about balance. You think about your feet. You think about where you're going to put your weight. You think about falling. Things that used to happen automatically suddenly require concentration. Every movement becomes a decision. And that's what recovery can feel like. It's not just physical, it's mental. You have to convince yourself to keep trying even when your body isn't doing what you want. The first steps after a stroke aren't like the first steps of a child. A child doesn't know what walking is supposed to feel like. They don't know what they've lost. They don't remember being able to run. They don't remember climbing stairs without thinking. But I did. I remembered. I knew exactly what normal felt like. And that made the difference incredibly frustrating. I wanted to move faster. I wanted to get back to normal. I wanted my old life back. But recovery doesn't care how impatient you are. Your body has its own timeline. And I had to accept that. The first time I took steps again, they weren't perfect. They weren't smooth, they weren't fast, but they were steps, and that mattered. Maybe I couldn't walk across a parking lot. Maybe I couldn't move the way I used to. But I had moved forward. And sometimes that's all you can ask for. One of the biggest challenges wasn't just strength. It was trust. After something like a stroke, you start questioning your body. Can I stand here? Can I turn around? Can I walk without falling? Can I put my weight on this leg? Can I make it across the room? Every question creates hesitation, and hesitation can make movement even harder. I had to slowly learn that I couldn't spend every second being afraid. I had to trust the work I was doing. I had to trust my body. And I had to trust the recovery process. That doesn't mean the fear disappeared. It didn't. But little by little, confidence started replacing fear. One step at a time. Physical therapy became an important part of the journey. And if you've never experienced serious rehabilitation, it's difficult to explain how exhausting simple exercises can become. Things that look easy from the outside can be incredibly difficult when your body isn't cooperating. You might practice standing. You might practice shifting your weight. You might practice moving one leg. You might practice taking a few steps. And then you do it again. And again. And again. Recovery can feel repetitive, sometimes painfully repetitive, but that repetition matters. Because you're teaching your body and brain to work together again. And every repetition is another opportunity to improve. There were days when I felt like I wasn't making progress. I'd work, I'd practice, I'd push myself, and then I'd wonder, is this really getting better? That's one of the most dangerous thoughts during recovery. Because when you don't see immediate results, it's easy to believe your effort isn't working. But recovery isn't always visible. Sometimes progress is happening underneath the surface. Sometimes you don't notice it until weeks later. Maybe one day you realize you don't need as much assistance. Maybe you can stand longer. Maybe you can take a few more steps. Maybe something that used to scare you doesn't scare you anymore. Those little changes add up. And eventually, you realize you've come farther than you thought. One of the biggest mistakes I made was comparing myself to who I used to be. Before the stroke, I could do things without thinking. After the stroke, I had to work for them. And that's frustrating. But eventually, I learned something important. I couldn't measure today's progress against yesterday's version of me. I had to measure it against where I was yesterday. If yesterday I couldn't take 5 steps, and today I took 6, that's progress. It might not look impressive to somebody else, but it matters to me. Because recovery isn't a competition. It's personal. There are certain moments in recovery that stay with you. Not because they're dramatic, but because they mean something. One of those moments was realizing that I could move around with more confidence. I could walk farther. I could do more. I wasn't constantly thinking about every movement. And that feeling was incredible. It wasn't necessarily that everything was perfect. It wasn't. But I could feel pieces of my old independence coming back. And independence means something different after you've lost it. You appreciate things you once took for granted. Walking to your car, standing in your kitchen, getting through a store, walking into a building. These aren't accomplishments most people celebrate. But after a stroke, they can feel like winning a championship. But recovery isn't a straight line. There are good days, and there are bad days. There are days when you feel strong, and there are days when your body reminds you that you're still recovering. That's another lesson I had to learn. A bad day doesn't mean you've failed. A setback doesn't erase the progress you've already made. You might take 3 steps forward, and feel like you've taken 2 steps backward. But you're still moving, and that's what matters. The key is not to let one bad day convince you that tomorrow won't be better. Before my stroke, I didn't think much about patience. I had things to do, places to go, work to complete, problems to solve. But recovery forced me to slow down. It taught me that you can't rush everything. Sometimes you have to wait. Sometimes you have to rest. Sometimes you have to repeat the same exercise hundreds of times. And sometimes you have to celebrate a victory that nobody else understands. That's patience. And patience became one of the most important parts of my recovery. People often focus on the physical part of a stroke. Can you walk? Can you move your arm? Can you talk? Can you do everyday activities? But there's another side people don't always see. The emotional side. There's frustration. There's fear. There's anger. There's sadness. There are moments when you wonder whether you'll ever feel like yourself again. And those emotions are real. You can't simply tell yourself, stay positive. Sometimes you're going to have a bad day. Sometimes you're going to feel overwhelmed. And that's okay. What matters is what you do next. You get up. You keep going. You take another step. Recovery isn't something you always do alone. The people around you can make an enormous difference. Sometimes you don't need someone to give you a motivational speech. Sometimes you just need someone standing beside you. Someone saying, "Come on, you've got this." Someone who believes in you when you're having trouble believing in yourself. Those people become incredibly important during recovery. And I learned to appreciate that support in a completely different way. Eventually, something started changing. I wasn't thinking about every single movement anymore. I wasn't analyzing every step. I was just walking. And that's when I realized how far I'd come. The goal had never been to make some giant miraculous recovery overnight. The goal was to keep moving. Keep practicing. Keep believing. Keep taking the next step. And eventually, those steps became a walk. If you're watching this because you're recovering from a stroke, I want you to hear something. Don't give up because you're not recovering as quickly as you expected. Don't compare your recovery to someone else's. And don't underestimate small victories. If today you can stand for 10 seconds longer than yesterday, that's progress. If you can take one more step, that's progress. If you can do something today that you couldn't do last week, that's progress. Celebrate it. Because those small victories are what build the bigger ones. There will probably never be a perfect day during recovery. There will be days when you're tired. Days when you're frustrated. Days when you don't feel motivated. But you don't need to feel motivated every day. Sometimes you just need to keep going. One exercise, one attempt, one step, then another. You don't have to know exactly how you're going to get to the finish line.